The very end of summer 2015 in Novosibirsk, Russia, turned out to be hot and sultry. The smartphone screen blinked. A new message came in. The guy reached for the gadget, unlocked it with a familiar quick motion, and almost fell off the couch. After reading his friend's words, "Hey bro, how's it going? I just stabbed a chick here, blood everywhere."
It's a bruise, not a scratch. I swear we didn't get it. His father did.
My first thought was that it was some kind of harsh joke, like he's just showing off again, but I already had a bad feeling inside. Karina liked him, but it just so happened that she started dating his friend. Alright, let's move on, as they say. But when, after the first strange message, there was a call from another number, and his friend, with a sometimes shaky, overly confident voice, told him the same thing. And then he sent some photos, and in them was Karina's body lying there with numerous bleeding wounds. The recipient, in a panic, thought that he had probably gone crazy from the heat. Or maybe it was real, some kind of cruel prank. You could expect anything from that jerk. But unfortunately, it wasn't a prank at all. That day, everything was completely ordinary. Karina just went out for a walk with her friends, but she never came back home. And a few hours later, her parents received horrifying news that split their lives into before and after. Their only daughter was brutally deprived of her life. It was immediately known who killed the girl, her ex-boyfriend. But the question that tormented Karina's loved ones for a long time and baffled the investigators was completely different. Why did he do it? It seemed there was no reason for such a shocking act, but now we will go through what happened step by step and understand everything. Let me remind you, you're on the Strashnota channel. It's only on YouTube and television on Telegram and vContact. There are just poor pirated copies and re-uploads. Please like, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Now, let's find out what happened. Karina Zalesova was born on February 28, 1999. She was the only and very much awaited child in the family, so she grew up surrounded by love and care. Her parents spared no expense for their beloved daughter, and she always lived up to their expectations. She was what you would call the perfect child. The girl grew up very kind, sensitive, and a bit naive. At school, Karina had a great atmosphere around her. She got along well with her classmates, was friendly and communicative, and never refused to help. She rarely had any conflicts with anyone at all. The teachers noted that Karina was very hard-working and diligent. She was passionate about drawing, swimming, and loved to read. She managed both her schoolwork and extracurricular activities, and everything came very easily to her. She was a real angel, her godmother said, and a very beautiful child. In the future, Karina dreamed of becoming a surgeon and continuing her studies in Japan. She studied Japanese intensively, prepared for her final school exams, and approached her studies very seriously. She passed the state final certification after 9th grade with excellent marks in all subjects. After discussing with her parents, Karina chose to transfer to school number 23, which offered a chemistry and biology class. Classes were supposed to start in just a couple of days. And, as always, on the 1st of September, schoolyards will be filled with well-dressed, lively students and colorful bouquets of flowers. But for Karina, the school year will never come again because of the twists of fate and perhaps short-sightedness. I was dating a guy named Mark, continuing Mark. Konkov was from a very wealthy family. He was born on August 28, 1999 in the family of Novosibirsk businessman Igor Konkov, who owns 11 companies related to metal processing and construction. As of 2015, the revenue from these enterprises was about 600 million rubles per year. Mark's mother was also not an ordinary housewife, but a qualified practicing psychologist. This family lived very well off, and the boy grew up spoiled, with a sense of complete freedom, permissiveness, and absolute power over others. Besides Mark, There were 4 other children in the family, 3 older than him, who had long been living separately, and the youngest, who was still in kindergarten and had cerebral palsy. The family lived in a spacious cottage in the Pervomaisky district of Novosibirsk, in a settlement where it wasn't easy for outsiders to get in. The entire area is surrounded by a tall fence, with a checkpoint at the entrance and security guards who don't let random passers-by in. Relatives and acquaintances of the boy, who were later interviewed, described Mark as a good and calm boy who wouldn't hurt a fly. But his peers, acquaintances, and school teachers expressed completely opposite opinions on this matter. Some described him as a bully, unstable and explosive, while others said he was a wonderful, intelligent, well-read guy with excellent manners. According to the teachers who taught Mark directly, in recent years he often got into conflicts, argued with teachers over any issue, became furious, repeatedly provoked fights, and hit his classmates. However, the school's teaching staff never reported any incidents to the police or other authorities, and later they were accused of such inaction. He blamed the teachers for this. Then, surprisingly, the father of Mark's victim, Sergei Zalesov, came to the teacher's defense. In an interview with the newspaper Komsomolskaya Pravda, he said that the teachers had repeatedly reported this teenager's behavior. I want to defend these people, to say a word in their defense. On the contrary, they did the right thing. They told the truth, even though they could have pretended not to know anything and said he was such a good kid. Sergei didn't understand why the accusations were directed at the teachers, who were already doing everything they could, and not, for example, at the mother of the underage girl. After all, as a practicing psychologist, in Sergei's opinion, she couldn't have failed to notice changes in her own son's behavior. Well, as for me, practicing psychologists are a toss-up. There are some you should run from, just like the anti-hero of our video today.
I brought all the children into my office. I believe that he is mentally unstable.
We get someone socially dangerous.
Yes, we are socially dangerous.
Well, and also Sergei was puzzled as to why the complaints were directed at the teachers and not, among others, at the father, who certainly had all the necessary means to provide proper upbringing for his son. Karina first met her future executioner at a friend's birthday party 2 years before the events that led to her death. Mark was brought to this party by one of his friends. They liked each other right away, quickly found many common interests, and eagerly discussed literature, art, and science. Later in court, Karina's grandmother said that the well-read, handsome guy made a huge impression on her granddaughter. From their very first meeting, Mark really seemed to Karina like a very intellectual young man. He read a lot, knew all of Dostoevsky's works, was interested in art, and generally made the impression of being a very nice and at the same time serious guy who knew all of Dostoevsky's works. It didn't bother her. Was it a warning sign? Just kidding, of course it wasn't. By the way, do you know all of Dostoevsky's works? Write in the comments. Sergei Zalesov recalled his daughter's first date like this. My daughter corresponded with Mark for a long time before meeting again. For their first date, he invited her to the movies. Karina told us about it right away. Naturally, we couldn't let our daughter go with an unfamiliar guy, so my wife and I drove Karina to that meeting. It was important for us to see who our daughter liked. We wanted to know what her new friend looked like, and Karina became friends with Mark. Gradually, the teenagers got to know each other better. They had dates, late-night chats, and everything else. What happens at such a young and romantic age? Very soon, Karina and Mark started dating for real. Mark often came to his girlfriend's house and was well acquainted with her parents. He also made a very good impression on them. He was at our house a couple of times. Nothing seemed suspicious. Well-read, intelligent, able to hold a conversation, he didn't get lost talking to us adults, Sergei Zalesky admitted in an interview with Komsomolskaya Pravda. But As often happens, these teenage relationships were not perfect. After some time, arguments, misunderstandings, and conflicts began between Mark and Karina. Her parents often saw traces of tears on their daughter's face, but she didn't say anything or explain. She was very secretive about this in general. Then he disappeared, and we saw Karina getting very upset in front of us, crying every other time. We were all about 15 or 16, you know what teenage infatuation is like, right? I told her back then, if he's making you cry, then you shouldn't talk to him. And so a year went by, and I didn't hear about Mark anymore. I thought they weren't talking anymore, said the father of the deceased girl, and Karina herself wrote these kinds of messages about her close friend. Mark started hanging out a lot with people he shouldn't be talking to, and his character started to change for the worse. But that's not even the worst part. But one of those losers got him hooked on sleep deprivation, going without sleep for a long time. Now he enjoys his state of affect. It's kind of like a drug in its effect. Yeah, he said that he almost feels happy. I'm really worried about him, but he doesn't listen to me and he won't. He's just not acting like himself. It's hyper-aggressive. Later, it will become known that this definition of hyper-aggressive, which the girl gave to her boyfriend's behavior, meant that Mark had tried to hit her more than once. It was a period when their relationship was rapidly going downhill. He often threatened Karina in court. Her grandmother described it like this. Karika says that Mark is very arrogant. There were messages, threats more than once, and Karina is secretive and didn't talk about it. The parents didn't take it seriously. Once her mother wanted to call and talk to Mark's parents, but Karina talked her out of it, promising not to communicate with him anymore. After the girl's death, the parents read terrible comments from Mark on social media, where he replied to their daughter's message with a heart by saying he would slit her throat, adding a smiling emoji. Karina considered such messages to be a bad joke, and that was a big mistake. One of Karina Zalesova's friends was close with her boyfriend for 2 months, apparently because he wanted to make Karina jealous, and that's why Mestku started dating her friend. And here's what this girl said about him. At first he seemed normal to me, but then I started noticing some unhealthy tendencies. Karina also started writing to me about it, saying that he got involved with a bad crowd. He stopped leaving his computer and wouldn't sleep for days and nights, trying to get some kind of effect from it, like from illegal substances. He became really strange. After Karina's relationship with Mark completely fell apart, her parents advised their daughter to end it all, forget about the unstable guy, and stop seeing him. After all, it really affected her emotional state. She cried day and night, refused to eat, and lost a lot of weight. What parent's heart could endure that? According to some versions, Mark himself was the first to break off all contact with the girl. Others claim that Karina broke up with the guy, having lost hope that he would ever be normal again. In the end, the teenagers broke up and stopped being a couple. However, Mark continued to follow Karina on social media, constantly messaged her, called her, bothered her, and suggested meeting up to discuss something. According to friends, during that time he became withdrawn, skipped school, and spent whole days playing computer games, but still didn't leave Karina alone. After successfully passing her exams, Karina easily got into school number 23, just as she had planned. She spent a lot of time studying chemistry and biology. Her parents paid for tutors, and she was determined to graduate with honors and get an excellent education. On August 28, 2015 at around 2:30 p.m. local time, the girl was with her parents at her new school for an organizational meeting before the start of the school year. In just a few more days, a new chapter in her life would have begun, something she had dreamed about for so long, a new school, new friends. All of this, Karina hoped, would help her forget about the difficult and traumatic relationship with Boris, her ex. To celebrate Karina getting into a prestigious school, which was actually quite hard to get into, her parents decided to have a festive dinner at home in a cozy atmosphere. However, someone called the girl and she asked to leave for a short while. She went to hang out with friends at Kalinina Square, which is a popular place in Novosibirsk, and promised to be home by 6 p.m. Of course, her parents let her go. As it turned out later, Mark called her then and invited her to his birthday party. He was the birthday boy that day, playing on her feelings and sympathy, knowing that his ex-girlfriend was still attached to him. He said that today, on his 16th birthday, no one came to his party.
And now I just got back from the spa gathering, but unfortunately, no one showed up.
The editor is sitting at home, so lonely and abandoned by everyone. Doesn't she feel sorry for him? Created by Dimatorzok. And of course Karina's heart trembled, because for some reason the hearts of many girls always start to tremble when they see all sorts of jerks. Karina lied to her parents, not telling them where she was really going, and went to the Konkov family's cottage. In fact, as it will later become clear from an interview with Mark's older sister, his family and close ones were deliberately in no hurry to congratulate the guy. Over the past 6 months, he had become very distant from everyone, grew aggressive and antisocial, was constantly rude to his family, and refused to behave normally. His family wanted to try to bring him to his senses by refusing to give congratulations and gifts, but from the very morning of his birthday, he called all of them, apologized, and tearfully begged to celebrate together after all. The family was delighted by this change, and they scheduled the celebration for exactly 6 p.m., agreeing to meet at Mark's older sister's place. But, as it later became clear, this was part of his plan to get everyone out of the house so he could have the place to himself to carry out his terrible scheme. So on that day, besides Mark, only his younger brother, who used a wheelchair, and the nanny who constantly looked after him, were in the house. Later, Karina's father said that around 5 p.m. her cell phone was still on, but for some reason she wasn't answering any calls. And by 6 p.m., the time she had promised to return, it was already unreachable. All the terrible things happened on the second floor of the luxurious cottage, while the little boy and his nanny were on the first floor. Mark, without any warning, met Karina around 4 p.m., grabbed a large kitchen knife and stabbed his ex about 12 times in the neck, and no less than 13 times, as forensic experts would later determine, to her face and hands. In addition, he punched her several times and hit her with something heavy. Karina defended herself and fought for her life, screamed, begged for mercy, and tried to break free. He himself would later tell his friend, the same one from the beginning of the video, the one he called after taking her life, that the girl, all wounded, with her throat cut, on her knees, begged him not to take her life. But these pleas did not move Mark, and he carried out his plan to the end. The nanny later said that she didn't hear any cries for help, and this was fully confirmed by the investigative experiment. The builders made very good soundproofing between the floors in the expensive home of businessman Konkov. During the investigation, it was revealed exactly how Mark called his friend that evening from the deceased's phone. He unlocked it by placing his dead friend's finger on the gadget at 6:12 post-meridian local time and confessed to what he had done. His friend didn't believe him, so Mark sent him a photo of the dead Karina, and he was found at the crime scene a little later. His parents, who also couldn't reach their son, found that he had turned off his phone. When they saw what their son had done, they first called lawyers to try to present the whole situation in the most favorable way possible. And they reported it to the police much later, around 9 p.m. But the main thing is that the motive for the crime remained a mystery to everyone for a long time, and no one could understand why. Mark needed to take Karina's life, even though he always told everyone that he loved her and couldn't live without her. Mark didn't want to leave the girl alone, and he himself was in no hurry to admit why he did it. After Karina didn't come home at the appointed time and stopped answering calls, her parents raised the alarm. Around 8 p.m. they called an ambulance, and an hour and a half later the police. They didn't have to wait long for a response. After hearing the story of their daughter's disappearance, the duty officer informed them that their girl had been found dead in the Pervomaisky district of the city and asked them to stay home and wait for the investigative committee. Karina's father recalled, "We didn't sleep all night. We walked the streets, searched for her until the very end, searched and waited for her, not believing what was said. She is our only child, our beloved daughter." Of course, there were many theories about what happened, and for a long time investigators couldn't determine not only the motives and reasons, but also exactly how the life was taken. And the lawyers of the underage offender, hired by Mark's father, were trying at that time to come up with a plausible version that would allow them to reduce their client's sentence as much as possible. We know that the other side is putting forward the version that Karina herself asked Mark to take her life, but this version doesn't hold up to scrutiny. The wounded hands of the schoolgirl actually show that she was defending herself, trying to break free. That's what the lawyer for the parents of the deceased girl, Vitaly Ognev, believed. "They really want to make it look like she almost took her own life," said Sergei Zalesov as well. They say that Mark's father pulled him out of the noose, and supposedly the boy didn't want to live after that either. I want to know.
Natalia, did you notice any marks on your son's neck? There is a mark. That's not made up. The only thing that's made up is about the substances in the mixture. It's not a groove, it's a bruise. We took him down, well, his father did, from the noose. There are many speculations.
Since he's so unstable, maybe he lured Karina to his place for his birthday. Maybe he blackmailed her, said for example that he'd kill himself if she didn't come, and she's naive, so she went. Honestly, we don't even know what to think anymore. No one is telling us what exactly happened there. At the trial, Mark admitted that he stabbed Karina only once, saying that taking her life wasn't planned, and the other stabs were so that she would die quickly and not suffer. Mark's parents seriously claimed that their son was trying to commit what is called an extended voluntary departure from life. Extended suicide, well, you understand. Otherwise YouTube will just ban me. Or rather, won't let you watch my video, so I'll have to act silly like this. In criminology, extended suicide is what they call a person's desire. When someone planning to end their own life also wants to take their loved ones with them, depriving them of life as well. And they added with tears in their eyes that after the death of his beloved girlfriend, Mark supposedly wanted to take his own life as well, and they pulled him out just in time. In addition to this information, which provokes a wide range of reactions from the court and the investigators. Some of Mark's friends said that over the past year, he often talked about wanting to end his life on his birthday, but everyone thought he was just making a harsh joke. This promising version is what the parents tried to promote and prove. "Because I gave him artificial respiration, my son is alive, but he says, 'Why did you save me? I don't want to live.'" Karina was involved in this one way or another, said Mark's father, Igor Konkov, in an interview. The day after Karina's life was taken, on August 29, 2015, Mark Konkov was brought to the Pervomaisky district court to determine a preventive measure. And as such, they chose, of course, house arrest, because after all, he was only suspected of taking a person's life. The investigation tried to get him placed in pre-trial detention, but the judge said there wasn't enough evidence, noting that the investigation had just begun, nothing was clear yet, and the suspect was under 18. But yes, if someone is under 18, do you think the objections to house arrest are cancelled or not cancelled? The court's actions immediately sparked a wave of protests and public outrage. All interested parties were, to put it mildly, shocked by this turn of events. The court had incomplete information because the deprivation of life happened on the 28th and the court session was on the 29th. In other words, the investigation simply didn't have time to fully provide the information that would show this person needed to be held in custody and that any other preventive measure would be impossible, comments the Zalesov family's lawyer Vitaly Ognev. As early as September 3rd, 2015 petitions demanding the arrest of Mark Konkov began appearing on various websites and news platforms, and more than 130,000 people signed these petitions. Social networks just exploded. It seemed like everyone started discussing this outrageous injustice. The public message was that the son of wealthy parents should not escape punishment, even though his lawyers were doing everything they could to make that happen. I'll be honest, I'm afraid that Mark's parents' money will play a role in this case. We've already seen that the guy was left free, so what's next? They'll claim he was emotionally distressed and not legally responsible, especially since his mother is a psychologist and his father was grieving. But I believe the crime was premeditated. By the way, here's one thing that points to that. A few hours before taking Karina's life, Mark deleted all his information from social media, and what punishment will he get for that? Staying at home is simply unfair, says Sergei, hoping that at least the publicity of this case will help him learn the whole truth about the death of his only daughter. A few days after taking her life, an application was submitted to the Novosibirsk City Hall to hold a rally in order to seek justice and force the court to reconsider its decision. The protesters were allowed to speak, but not in the main city square, instead at a less popular venue. As a result, the scheduled rally never took place. It was held only from September 7, where not thousands, as originally planned, but only about 100 people were present. But the news about Karina's death spread not only in Novosibirsk. The protests were also supported in Moscow, where about 200 participants gathered on October 31, as well as in other cities like Yekaterinburg and St. Petersburg, and even at the Russian consulate in Lviv. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation fully appealed the Pervomaisky court's house arrest decision. On September 9, the court ordered Mark Konkova to be held in a pre-trial detention center for 2 months, and the teenager was taken into custody right in the courtroom where the retrial was taking place. He partially admitted his guilt, but did not express any apologies or regrets, and he said, almost in passing, that he wanted to kill, and he did. At the final trial in the case of Karina Zalesova's death, public observers crowded the courthouse corridors to follow the proceedings. Some people were allowed in, including Karina's relatives, her grandmother, grandfather, godmother, and a few members of the public. But then they said that an urgent verbal order came from the court chairman not to let anyone into the building, said the public activist Natalia Danilova. They tried to escort the grandmother out by the arms, and the grandfather, who had stepped outside, couldn't get back in. Just like at Kresnaya, a crowd of journalists, public figures, and activists gathered near the courthouse. It was impossible to get through. The activists were holding portraits of Karina Zalesova and shouting, "We want the law to be equal for everyone without exception. Our demands are perfectly reasonable, but the situation her parents are in is not." Natalia Konkova, Mark's mother, gave a short interview to journalists. "Did you apologize to Karina's parents?" the interviewer, the editor, asked. "I really wanted to apologize to the parents," the woman answered vaguely. "So what stopped you? You're a psychologist. Didn't you notice that something was wrong with your son?" "I did notice. I feel so bad. I'll hold a press conference, I promise. Right now, I've signed a non-disclosure agreement for the case materials. As soon as the investigation is over, I'll meet with anyone who wants to." "You said that Mark wanted to take his own life, but where is the mark on his neck? Is it there?" "There's no fabrication here. The only fabrications are in the media. It's not a mark, it's a bruise. I swear his father took him out of the noose." There are a lot of speculations about this topic. "I raised my children the same way. I believe he's just mentally ill, he's socially dangerous, so why didn't you isolate him?" There were no such signs until the very end, and now he's been taken into custody. "I've been living in a total nightmare for 2 weeks, but it's a nightmare for Karina's parents. They lost their only daughter." "I agree, there are no words. She was one of the brightest kids, just an angel." So, what stopped you from apologizing? Can you say something now that the girl's parents will be able to read? Yulia and Sergei, I offer. I don't know what words to use to ask for forgiveness. In situations like this, we pray. Did you talk to your son? Yes, but he's not opening up. He's in a state right now. Just a talking head, nothing more. The investigation fully confirmed that Karina desperately fought for her life, so the theory that the teenage lovers wanted to end their lives together was immediately dismissed as unfounded. Mark Konkov was sent for a compulsory psychological and psychiatric evaluation. It took as many as 3 repetitions of this procedure before the experts concluded that the defendant should be considered partially sane. The specialists agreed that Mark Konkov, who is accused of taking the life of Karina Zalesova, suffers from schizotypal disorder and has a tendency towards sadism. But according to representatives of the investigative committee, this is not an obstacle to bringing the guy to criminal responsibility. As a result, Mark had his charge under the criminal code toughened, reclassified from taking a life to taking a life with particular cruelty. All this happened back in April 2012, but Mark's defense, consisting of a whole group of lawyers, stuck to their version of what happened. Such a number of injuries may indicate that the defendant wanted to lessen the girl's suffering, meaning his actions could be seen as an element of compassion. That's what one of the lawyers said. And Mark's father even insisted to everyone that Karina herself asked the guy to take her life, but these arguments seemed completely unfounded. The girl had both arms slashed, multiple stab wounds, and all the signs of a violent death. In general, the wealthy parents of the star boy tried to do everything to get a court verdict that would allow him to receive the lightest possible punishment. The prosecution and the parents of the deceased insisted on 10 years in prison, but the defense asked for a lighter sentence. After all, the defendant is still a teenager with an unstable psyche. 10 years, not just 8 or 6, he took a life. With particular cruelty, he mocked her, shouted Yekaterina Buntovskik, an activist in the courtroom, while the mother of the deceased, in tears, later asked, "What about him?" During the break, the defendant and the lawyer were even laughing. On April 24, 2016, the property of the Konkov family was seized, all real estate, cars, and the land plot. And on May 13, the Investigative Committee of Russia announced the completion of the investigation, during which more than 50 people were interviewed. These included peers, classmates, relatives, and teachers. Numerous investigative experiments, inspections, and other examinations were conducted. On June 27, 2016, the trial began, and now the judge had all the materials at his disposal. A crowd of journalists, concerned citizens, and activists gathered outside the building. During the trial, the defendant only partially admitted guilt, not acknowledging the act as especially cruel, which affects the sentence. Of course, the lawyers played their part here, teaching the teenager what to say and what not to say. The fact that Konkov stabbed his girlfriend more than 20 times didn't seem to bother the defense, who insisted that the act could not be classified as especially cruel. When Karina's mother was questioned, she said that the 16-year-old had terrible upbringing, which caused a strong reaction from the defendant's father, who jumped up and started acting out in the courtroom. He shouted, "When will she shut her mouth? I'm sick of her hatred," and started pounding his fists on the table. "It was terrible," said Karina's and Yulia's mother, adding that both the prosecutor and the judge immediately reprimanded the man. Subtitle editor. Almost all the witnesses were questioned on August 30. The defendant's relatives gave only positive descriptions of Mark. The prosecution activists continued to demand a harsher punishment for the criminal. And at the protest that took place on August 23, after Mark's father's terrible behavior, the public even tried to get him sentenced as well for knowingly giving false statements. On October 17, they finally finished questioning the teenager himself, who eventually confessed to taking a life and answered all the questions from his lawyers. However, for some reason, he refrained from answering questions from the prosecution. Mark Konkov abandoned the version about a double suicide and told the truth that he wanted to kill and did kill, noted the Zalesova family's lawyer. But before moving on to the verdict and the motive for why Mark did all this, I'll try to analyze the personality of the perpetrator. Mark Konkov is a classic example of a narcissistic sadist with elements of psychopathy, whose actions were driven by a combination of pathological egocentrism, a thirst for control, and deep emotional immaturity. His personality was formed under conditions of overprotection and permissiveness, which led to a distorted perception of reality and a complete lack of empathy. The key personality traits are narcissism and, most importantly, a sense of entitlement. He grew up in a wealthy family where he was used to getting everything at his first request and saw people as objects who should obey his wishes. When Karina refused the relationship, it became a narcissistic injury for him. He couldn't accept losing control over Karina. Sadistic tendencies. The act of taking a life had a ritualistic nature. Multiple stab wounds showing photos of the victim to a friend, describing her suffering. He enjoyed the helplessness of the victim and her pain, suffering psychopathic traits, and lack of remorse. In court, he behaved coldly, only formally admitting guilt, manipulative, trying to present the act of taking a life as an act of mercy. He allegedly wanted Karina not to suffer, but although this could be the lawyer's version, pathological lying, he made up stories about a double suicide and her asking him to take her life, even though the girl desperately defended herself. But again, on the other hand, these could all be versions made up by the lawyers, which they simply taught Mark. But the influence of a destructive environment could very well have taken place. Before taking her life, Konkov communicated with people who promoted violence and suicide. One of these advisors even made him a list of people who should be killed after the murder. Mark reported to this person, but more on that later. And then there's the schizotypal disorder. Here, the examination concluded a tendency toward depersonalization, perceiving oneself as an observer of one's actions rather than a participant. There's also distorted thinking. He believed that taking a life was a way to maintain control, or even to free Karina from suffering. In general, Mark Konkov is a calculating executioner with a narcissistic sadistic personality type for whom violence became a way to assert power and compensate for his own inferiority. His danger lies in his ability to disguise himself as normal until he gets the opportunity to act out his pathological fantasies. On October 31, 2016, the final hearing was held in the case of the death of Karina Zalesova. The court delivered its verdict. Mark Konkov was found guilty of taking a life and sentenced to 9 years, with part of the sentence to be served in a juvenile detention facility. In addition, he was ordered to undergo outpatient psychiatric treatment, and he was required to satisfy the material claims of the victim's parents by paying 2 million rubles to each of them, plus another 300,000 rubles to cover the expenses for their daughter's proper burial. After the verdict was announced, members of the public immediately began making sharp comments and hurling insults at the defendant. However, Karina's parents considered the punishment to be fair, but thought that the 9-year sentence was not enough. They did not appeal the court's decision. It was already very hard for them. But Mark's parents immediately stated that they would not pay anyone anything and declared themselves bankrupt. But the motive for taking a life still remained unclear. There were various rumors and speculations, like Karina was supposedly pregnant by Mark and that he decided to get rid of the extra burden this way, and that he was just a psycho and made a bet with his friends that he could take someone's life without any problems. But all these theories were not confirmed during the investigation. Except for partial incapacity, of course, but that alone couldn't be a motive either. On August 28, 2017, Mark Konkov turned 18, and as an adult, he was transferred from a juvenile detention center to a correctional facility. It was reported that there he received many disciplinary penalties for getting into fights with other inmates. According to some reports, he received up to 99 penalties during his entire sentence. That actually sounds like some kind of bank promotion. Only here, it's up to 99 penalties in prison. Hurry up! On December 20 of the same year, Mark attempted to take his own life. While in the colony, he shot himself in the chest with a homemade weapon, but survived. He could have been released on parole as early as 2020, but due to a large number of violations, he was deprived of this opportunity and was only released in December 2023. He spent a total of 8 years and 3 months in detention, since 1 day in a pre-trial detention center counts as 1.5 days in a general regime colony. He is now continuing to live with his family in Novosibirsk. But what about the motive? You might ask. Or maybe you won't, but I'll tell you anyway, because there really was a motive, and it wasn't pregnancy or some silly argument. It turned out to be much more complicated. Much later, after the criminal case was closed and Konkov was sent to prison, one of his friends posted a screenshot of a certain conversation on social media where someone wrote, "Why did Mark take Karina's life?" This social network, judging by how the chat looks, strangely reminds me of VKontakte, where there is absolutely no prohibited content and everything is calm. And I'll leave this screenshot in the Strashnoti Telegram channel. The link will be under the video. Because if I put it here, YouTube will probably suppress me. And then you won't see Strashnoti videos anymore and you'll be very sad. So, by the way, dislike and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so this doesn't happen to you. Also, on Telegram, I leave sources and other additional materials if I find something interesting. I try not to leave anything uninteresting. So, the company the guy got involved with was really too specific because of the kind of people who influence teenagers to take their own life, use illegal substances and all that stuff, kind of like Blue Whale, but for real. Here's what this person wrote, whose opinion was apparently very important to Mark. He even told me about wanting to take someone's life. I made him a list of people who deserved to die, and in the end, he told me he wasn't going to take anyone's life. But then, over the phone, he said he wanted to wipe out the whole family. After taking Karina's life, the teenager even sent his ideological mentor a report on the work done, describing how the dying Karina begged him for mercy. After waiting for things to calm down and for Mark's trial to be over, this person told someone else about everything, saying something like, "Mark, don't take my life, please, I won't tell anyone, I promise," or something along those lines. He was also amazed at how she could speak with her throat cut. If the trachea is cut, it's impossible to speak. He described the rest of the process to me in detail and finished by saying that it was very pleasant. I don't even know if he'll be sent to prison or to a mental hospital. This correspondence makes it clear that the 16-year-old teenager was under someone's strong influence, but it's impossible to reliably find out who that person was. The investigation and trial have long been over, and no one will dig up the materials from the archive case because of screenshots from yet another social network.